How do fractional CMOs hit the ground running? Hi, I'm Dean Way. Welcome to Fractional CMOs and the 90-Day Win. There's a lot of variety in how they kick off a new client engagement. In fact, there's so much variety, it's valuable to just listen to what opportunities they look for, what they tackle first, and what they wish wasn't true when they start a new project. So let's find out. Hi, Francesca.
Hi, Dean.
Okay, so imagine that you just started a new engagement. You're the fractional CMO. We'll talk about early wins in a moment. But first, what problems do you normally see, or what problems do you normally look for on day one? And tell the audience who you are and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Dean. I'm Francesca Furchtgott at Conifer Co. We're a brand and content agency. My role there is to be a fractional CMO for small companies who need to get noticed and be remembered on a small budget. They need to disrupt, they need to be seen, and they need to do that without spending $1 million on advertising. I extend that disrupt big at a small scale approach in my volunteer work too. I run a free art gallery, like a little free library, but for art. It has the same policy as for books. Take one, leave one.
Nice.
So to answer your question about a new engagement, I will say first, I'm usually brought on to tackle a specific problem that the CEO has identified. So that might be building a regular social media presence, testing go-to-market strategies, or even taking the entire marketing function off of someone else's plate. So those are the problems or issues that have been identified up front. But as you suggested, there are often other problems that I see.
Right.
Some are strategic. So I often see a lack of definition around the business's value proposition and the target audiences. So often a lot of that information lives in the CEO's head or in leadership's head, and it's obvious to them, but it's not obvious to everyone else. And so everyone in the business is operating under their own idea of what the business's value proposition is. And that leads to a lot of mixed messaging, both internally and externally.
Okay.
Another big problem that I see is from a systems perspective. So I often notice a patchwork of marketing systems that don't talk to each other or that don't talk to the business's core CRM. And that makes it harder to manage the business in general, but it often separates the marketing from the rest of the business instead of having the function drive towards one unified goal, which is selling and then fulfilling the product or services that the business is trying to offer.
My first boss used to call that what's temporary becomes permanent unless someone pays attention.
Exactly.
So Brian, same question, new engagement, you're the FCMO, right? What problems or sort of red flags do you typically see on day one? And tell everyone who you are.
Sure. Thanks, Dean. I'm Brian Talbot. I am a fractional CMO. My organization is the Value CMO, and we specialize in strategy and storytelling. We work with small, medium-sized businesses, generally in the $2 to $20 million range. One of the things that we do is we become the first CMO level person that comes in to bring strategy, because usually those companies grow through heroics,
Right.
or through people who have gotten pushed into a role and learning on the job. And so at that size, they're usually not quite ready to go ahead and do a six-figure hire of a full-time CMO. But I can bring I like to call it the market, the message, and the map, right? The foundations of marketing that help them get established. And then we go through that and help them grow and track that over the course of 6 months or a year, and get them to the point where they can launch on their own. And that's kind of the goal. So, yeah, that is very much the way. The issues that I find is small business owners have done a great job of growing their organization, whether they're brand new or whether they've been around for 10 years, but it's mostly all done through heroics and through trying to find resources internally to pick up the slack, or to go outside and hire a freelancer here and a freelancer there, right. A whole lot of gig people. And the problem is these people know their business. They don't necessarily have the marketing specialty to be able to organize, manage, guide, direct, and get the results out of marketing freelancers or even their own internal people. And so that's why it's really essential. The first thing I do is I walk in and I like to do a quick survey of everybody and understand what they think the company is, and then turn around and draft not only a brand messaging playbook that they can go off of, so there's clear, concise, and consistent messaging, but also a strategic roadmap that starts with goals, follows up with strategies, and then execution. And at the bottom of that list is the resources needed to be able to effectively execute. And then we track that execution in regular periodic progress checkpoints. So,
Okay, then let me stay with you for a second. Let's
yeah.
talk about then what kind of I'm normally brought in on for the writing company that I am. I'm normally brought in the first 90 days exactly because what we do is a bunch of early visible wins, but it's like small tactical stuff.
Right.
Right. And then what other kinds of early wins or low hanging fruit do you like to see if it's there, or try to tackle it in the first 90 days to sort of get something up on the board while you're doing your longer term discovery and planning?
Yeah, so actually that whole process happens within the first 60 to 90 days. And so that is a big win, because it lays the foundation for all the other work. In the meantime, it's important to go ahead and get alignment throughout the organization, get everybody on the same page, everybody pulling in the same direction. And that, and adding another voice of leadership to their C-suite, are really the things that help provide the direction and the guidance. And of course, there's a lot of resources they may not have access to. And the fact that I've been doing this for a very long time helps me be able to provide additional
Actually, so
resources.
in a way, one of your early wins is comfort
and confidence.
right?
Those are two very big
Relief.
early wins.
Yeah.
And then the roadmap to continue.
And how about you, Francesca? What kind of early wins or low-hanging fruit do you often see or like to go after to get stuff, moving while you're doing your longer-term stuff?
I've seen with a lot of the CEOs that I work with that they like to see stuff happening, and getting some public-facing content out there is definitely low-hanging fruit. While I'm creating that longer-term content strategy and that longer-term marketing strategy, it is pretty easy to put together a quick editorial calendar for the first 90 days, or give it 60 days, and start helping them get content out the door. And some of that is social media. That's pretty easy to start pulling things together.
Right.
Sometimes it can be some of their email marketing, but a lot of that also then serves as the crux to define what Brian was talking about, which is to say, okay, what is everyone's role here? Does everyone understand what the messaging is supposed to be? Does everyone understand how do we actually get a piece of content out the door? Where do the assets live? Who's approving everything? So it is actually an interesting exercise, a mini exercise in starting to get buy-in from the team and starting to get alignment from the team.
All right. Well, then when you show up to what for you is a new client, and maybe you're the first fractional CMO or any kind of CMO that they've ever worked with, right? What do clients normally kind of not see or not even know about their business and their business remarketing, until you get there?
I think some of them are the underlying problems that we talked about before. What are the basic systems that need to be in place from a tech perspective, from a sort of human resources team perspective? And then I think some of those strategic components, the CEOs aren't really thinking about. How do they define what they're doing? How do they, are they keeping an eye on what their competition is doing? Do they know specifically who their competition is? And Brian talked about, heroics, which I think is such a great way of articulating what small business owners are doing from a marketing perspective. But there are a lot of things that can be a little bit time consuming, or that need a system in place to start figuring out, all right, how do I monitor my competition? How do I build into what they're doing? How do I take from that and adjust my strategy or reinforce my strategy? How do I think about what my long-term content strategy is, as opposed to being reactive and saying, oh, wait, it's Thanksgiving this week. Should I send out a Thanksgiving message? Or, oh, it's Christmas. Should I be sending my clients a holiday card? Having that long-term planning is something that the CEOs don't have time to think about, and they're worrying about so many other things. And that's where a lot of the value of a fractional CMO can come in, is basically helping plan for that long term, taking the heroics out of it and putting a lot of systems in place that just make everything a lot easier.
There's I won't say who his name is, but there's a famous personal finance public speaker guy, and in one of the speeches that he gives, he calls out to all of the husbands in the audience, and he says, "Hey, I'm going to give you guys such a great bit of inside knowledge that's going to help you a lot this year. This year, Christmas falls on December 25th." He said, "Do with that what you should. Go." Right.
Perfect.
And Brian, how about you for what are clients not, I mean, the thing about it is, like, you build up your business or you've been in a company for a while, right? And then you stop seeing the stuff that's there every day. All of us don't see stuff because we see it all the time.
Absolutely.
Right? What do they not normally see or know about marketing until you start working with them?
Well, one of the most important things is the way they see their business. After a while, right, it's easy when you're 1, 2, or 3 people. But when you start to grow to 25 or 50 or even 100 people, right, all of a sudden the alignment starts to go away. So the first thing I always do with a company is I start with a current state assessment.
Right.
And it's a real casual one, right? I say, so what do you do? Or who are you? I ask really open-ended questions, right? Who are you? What's your brand, and what are you doing to get business? Now within there, I mean, that's a trap, because within there's a whole bunch of questions, right? What it's interesting is I get all the key stakeholders, and I have them all fill it out individually. Then we get together and we go over it, and it's amazing how often even people within a leadership team or a stakeholder group are just simply not on the same page. And so when you start to realize that, and you can help them see that the importance of being on the same page will help you be able to grow and scale, then it feeds into everything else as we go. It's also a great foundation to start a strategic plan. It's a great foundation to get into what are your brand messaging key points and core beliefs and all those other pieces and parts that go into the bigger picture.
All right, so let's change direction a tiny little bit. So what should a CEO understand, or a leadership team understand, about fractional CMOs and how to get maximum value out of what's probably the very first one they're ever going to hire?
Yeah, so probably the most important thing from my perspective is I'm not a one-man marketing team for you.
Right.
There's a lot of skills I can do. I sat in tons of chairs over my career. And so I can go ahead and be your graphic designer, but I'm the most expensive graphic designer you're ever going to hire, right? Instead, let me lead, guide, and plan and manage all the marketing activities that go into increasing revenue, reaching marketing goals. And if those two things happen successfully, it even affects your operations and your growth strategy as an organization. I'm much more than marketing. So don't have me become, your social media guy.
Francesca, what do you think? Like, how do you get the maximum value out of a fractional CMO?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Brian said resonates. I think for me, I think about 3 things. First, that a fractional CMO is really a strategic thinker, and that you should consider them as part of your overarching C-suite team. So anytime you're having a C-suite meeting, they should be part of that. And they're going to bring that marketing voice to your overarching strategy discussion. And then they're going to bring the outputs of your strategic conversation into the marketing strategy. The other thing is, as Brian said, fractional CMOs have seen a lot of different companies. They've helped a lot of different companies grow. And yes, the CEO knows the business best, but take advantage of the fractional CMO's experience to say, how have other businesses of my size or in my industry, how have they succeeded? and lean on that, because that's a big value add that the fractional CMO is bringing. And finally, I would say treat the fractional CMO like a full-time employee. They might not be there for 40 hours a week, but give them access to the team Slack. Build
Right.
them into your team so that they become a trusted member of the team. And that's also what the fractional CMO wants. They want a long-term client in you. Obviously, they want to help you grow to the point that you might want to bring in somebody full-time, but they don't want to be bouncing from client to client. They want to do a really good job for you, and treating them like a full-time employee, giving them access to the entire team is going to do a lot to help them bring the maximum value, to help them have those conversations that will allow them to do the best job for you.
I think
So
those are
then,
really strong points, especially
yeah,
the one, if you hire a fractional CMO, include them in your C-suite, include them in your meetings, in your leadership meetings, because that's the one thing that people I've found have the biggest challenge with. Be open, right? I have clients that still struggle to allow me to see their numbers. It's like, well, if you can't share that information, it's really hard for me to be helpful to the best of my abilities, because obviously we're all in it for, to help grow revenue. That's kind of how we keep score in business. So if that's one of the core components of what we're trying to achieve, you can't be keeping things from people. So your comments, Francesca, on making sure that they are included as you would a full-time employee, I think are really essential there.
all right. So then that's a good lead into something else, which is like, what are sort of the red flags, or what are the signs that a client should not have hired a fractional CMO or wasn't ready for a fractional CMO yet? Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest one for me is if you end up doing all the tactical work and you don't set up and have a strategic role within the organization. There's plenty of freelancers you can get for far less money
Mm-hmm.
that will do the work for you. So that's not an effective use.
Francesca, is there a red flag?
I would say if you're not ready to commit the time, I've seen CEOs who basically just want to hand off marketing to somebody else and then never talk to them again, and that's just not a great way to use the resource. Fractional CMO is going to be a strategic partner and can build out a strategy, but will need the CEO's time and input and then buy-in to build out that strategy. And long term, as we've been talking about, the fractional CMO is a sort of collaborative team member. And so the CEO shouldn't expect that they can just hand it off and say, great, I never have to think about this again.
It's not a fire and forget kind of situation.
Right.
That's such an important point, right? I always tell people marketing is an all skate, right? Now that dates me back to junior high skating parties, but that's okay. I'll take it. Um, it is not one person's job, and I've had CEOs before that have said, "Well, you're in charge of marketing, so it's your responsibility." No, everyone's responsibility. It's everyone's under a responsibility to understand the messaging and how to talk to people. It's everyone's responsibility to take ownership of things, right? And marketing is truly an all skate opportunity.
Yeah, ultimately, every employee can be a voice for the organization. And so empowering employees to be able to speak the way that you want them to speak is really important. And
Yeah.
getting them aligned on what it is that
Yeah.
the organization is doing is so important. And doing that in a positive way to make sure that their voice is going to be a positive one for you is crucial.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're almost out of time. I have another hypothetical. We started with a hypothetical. We'll finish with a hypothetical. So the CEOs come to you and said, hey, you and I together are going to interview some candidates and then pick the new head of sales. What are you looking for? What are you asking? What are you keeping an eye out for when if you had a chance to bring in a head of sales instead of sort of adapting to a head of sales that's already in place? Francesca, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, first I'd be looking at experience and sort of relevant experience in other sort of either within the industry or within a sort of parallel industry. And people always talk about this question of where does marketing end and where does sales start? And there's this sort of gray zone of who's responsible for what. And so being able to be in the room as part of this conversation is actually really a sign of strength of the CEO and really a sign of opportunity for how to shape that marketing and sales interaction in the future. And so I think that I would also be looking for how that individual would think about working with marketing and think about where do the sales responsibilities lie, where do the marketing responsibilities lie, and how do those two tie together in a really powerful way to sort of bring the entire organization forward.
Brian?
Yeah, it's about collaboration and alignment. It has to be. The most successful organizations I've ever worked in have had.
All right, this has been great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dean.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Francesca. Thank you, Brian. You'd be surprised. This is episode 8, I think, or it's the 8th one recorded, and so none of them have been published yet, but they're about to start being published. And so I'm going to say something now that only works because no future guest, or at least the next 2, have ever seen any episodes because they can't. But about half the time, when I ask fractional CMOs what they look for in a new head of sales, about half the time they completely forget to mention marketing. And they only talk about what makes for a good head of sales. And then the other half of the time, it ends up being like, alignment with marketing and understanding where they sort of come up against it. And I just think it's a curious phenomenon that so many fractional CMOs or CMOs sort of don't think to include a relationship or opinion about marketing when they are hiring, in this scenario, a new head of sales. I don't know why, but I think it's just great. It's a lot of fun. All right, that's it for this episode. Thanks very much. Thanks again, folks. And we'll see you soon. Bye.